Well, hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here today. Hello to those of you out there on Zoom and the PDC and around the world. Global audience we have here. Yeah, I'm happy to welcome you all here today, and most importantly, to welcome our special guest, Dr. Michelle Russen. I was going to say Russian because there's a singer named Patrice Russian, but whatever. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Michelle. So today's featured presenter is Michelle Russen, assistant professor in the Department of Marketing's Hospitality Management Program at the Palm Desert campus. Dr. Russen joined our campus community in August 22, bringing 10 years of professional hospitality experience to the classroom. She also previously taught at the University of Houston, Conrad Hilton College, and the Art Institutes of Houston. Since joining CSUSB, Dr. Russen has taught several courses ranging from Introduction to Hospitality and Tourism, which she developed and designed, to independent study courses and hotel operations, tactics, and strategies. I was doing a little snooping around earlier today and yesterday about you. You don't have a very scandalous web presence. I hope you will work on that. I did read the abstracts of several of your articles, and it seems to be that you consistently are focused, your research has focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or inclusion, equity, and diversity in hospitality spaces. And I think those your findings in those themes are kind of more broadly applicable to lots of other spaces and industries. Oh, back to the script. You jumped right in after joining our campus in 2022, enlisting as chair and co-chair of the CSUSB's Business and Hospitality Club, which allows students to build relationships with businesses in the Coachella Valley, where it is 94 degrees today, so much cooler here right now. And also for students, they can form potential career placement opportunities after they graduate. So thank you for serving our students in that capacity. As I mentioned, Dr. Russen's research has been published in, well, I've mentioned the themes, but it's been published in several peer-reviewed publications, including the Journal of Human Resources in Hospitality and Tourism and the International Journal of Hospitality Management. And again, your research, her research, focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in hospitality leadership. Her most recent publication, The Role of Masculine and Feminine Gender Enactment in Hospitality Leadership, was co-published with faculty from the University of Houston last December. This Friday, she and Hospitality Management Program Director Joe Tormey, and without me notably, will be heading to Italy with a group of hospitality management students to immerse themselves in Italian culture, learn about the country's hospitality management and hospitality management and travel and transportation systems, and to develop their intercultural communication skills. Again, it's not too late. I could go. I'm supposed to be in DC, but I'll happily come with you instead. As shared in the event flyer, her presentation today is titled Leadership Inclusion Theory, and it focuses on how hospitality organizations can foster inclusion and equity. And before I say, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michelle Russen, I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the random fact I just learned about you, which is that she has a 9-year-old black lab mix named Luke, and he used to have a sister named Leia, which says something about you that maybe you'll share with them later on, maybe not. But anyway, welcome, Dr. Russen, and thank you for doing this today.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I actually have some good news. I just had 2 other papers accepted, so I have 2 more recent publications. Thank you. Also on the same topic. The most recent one was Think Leader, Think Man, and it's about the role of implicit bias in decision-making in hospitality leadership. So of course, that is my primary focus area. It's very focused. So with that, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the theory that I developed, which is leadership inclusion theory. Do we have it? Perfect. Thank you. So leadership inclusion is all about where do we start? So it's been argued recently that it doesn't really matter where we start. When we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as long as we're doing something, then we're doing it well. Well, have you ever heard the term of trying to eat an elephant one bite at a time? we're going to do the same with diversity, equity, and inclusion because we have to start somewhere. So with that, I want to show you first a little clip on why this is so important. Did it not download into here? It's okay. Oh, because it's on PDF, not in PowerPoint. Just a second, technical difficulties. Suspenseful music just plays. Do, 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 do. I have it on a USB drive if you need it. Yeah. Okay, well, that's okay. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. We're not going to try to force it. Okay, so essentially what this is, has anybody in here watched House before? In 2006, House made a 30-second clip where he described white privilege and also exclusion and workplace discrimination within 30 seconds so eloquently, where he said to the other doctor here that what essentially skinny, white, beautiful people, what we do is we draw this little circle. Anybody who doesn't fit in this little tiny circle, what we try to do is force everybody else to assimilate to us. And if you don't, then, well, we just straight up pity you. That's not how things are supposed to be. Well, that's why inclusion is so important. Let's get rid of the circle. Let's just toss it out the window and let's just say we're all going to coexist and we're going to appreciate each other for our differences. And that's where we get here. When we have inclusion in the workplace, it results in things like joyfulness, attachment, eagerness, belonging. We create a sense of self within our organization. What we do is we try to look at what each person brings to the table because we're different and value it. And that's inclusion, is saying, you're different from me and I appreciate that. So let's take our two ideas together. And it's called super additivity, where we take 2 plus 2. Anybody in accounting or finance is going to tell you that equals 4. I'm going to say no, 2 plus 2 equals 6, 8, or 10, because we're multiplying with each other. We're not just adding. So what we try to do is create policies and practices so far that try to foster these things. Well, what I'm arguing here is it's bigger than that. It's not just establishing an organizational policy and saying we value diversity and diversity management. We want people to belong here. But what do we do about that? How do we do that? What kinds of policies are actually going to work? So I have a very special place in my heart for hospitality. We are the people. I was in it. It found me. I didn't find it. I'm a first-generation college student. I don't know if anybody in here knows that or not, but I am a first-generation college student, and I was in the situation that many of our students face. I come from a very humble background, to put it kindly. And so I didn't have help for college. I started at a community college. I'm a transfer student, so I can relate to a lot of our students. But I needed a job to pay my way through college. And so being a restaurant server was super flexible. I could work from 5 to 10 p.m. I could go to school during the day, and that was my life. I accidentally fell in love with it. I was actually going to go into education first. I found my way there eventually, but hospitality is my first passion. Things that are happening, though, that are shaking up the industry. When COVID happened, a lot of women were forced to realize we're not appreciated here. We're not valued. When we have to go and support our family, organizations were like, okay, see you later, bye. They didn't support us. So that led to what's called the Great Resignation in the hospitality industry. So that's one of the social movements where we're realizing that if you don't appreciate us, then we're going to leave and find an organization that does. Not all organizations are exclusive, right? So that leads to reduced tenure. In hospitality specifically, there's a lot of implicit bias. We employ the most underrepresented groups in any industry. We employ everyone from felons to racially diverse, to gender diverse, to everything else, the highest percentage of any of these. That makes anybody unique and different. But our top management team is still 73% heterosexual white men. What's happening when your employees are exact opposite? They're 73, 75% not fitting those descriptors. So that's obvious to implicit bias. From this, I decided to look at what the top performing institutions are doing that actually do have diversity and inclusion in the upper echelon. So I decided to interview them. The purpose of my study was to understand the relationship in DEI. How do these things influence each other? What does it actually look like? So from there, I created a framework for inclusion and tested the outcomes from that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is first to theoretically explain how this relationship works, and then how we retain diverse talents and produce overall better outcomes for our industry in the second study. So I use constructivist grounded theory methods. What we do in constructivist grounded theory is we say, I am a white woman. My experience is going to be different than other people who do not identify as white women. But we take that into account. It's part of the research process. What we're aiming to do is create an abstract understanding of relationships and have reflexivity. So it's an open conversation. It's not anything structured. It's, well, somewhat structured. We do have a list of questions we have to get through, but it's more of a conversation and understanding what the processes are that are influencing all of these different variables of interest to me and what's going on. We also, unlike other grounded theory methods that are forcing you to basically say, oh, your prior knowledge, any literature that exists, it doesn't count. You have to start from zero. What we do here is we actually incorporate that. We say, why bother excluding things, saying that you're excluding things that you already know when it's absolutely going to influence the way that you interpret the world around you. It's going to interpret the way that I'm understanding what you're saying to me. And my own experience in hospitality leadership will influence the way that I'm understanding their responses, and it becomes an open dialogue. We're also looking at social processes. We're taking background into account. We're saying that all these people, because of the way we identify and how other people would describe us also, influences the way that they react with us. So the social processes are all part of it. There's a 5-step process when you're going through constructivist grounded theory. First, you start with elucidating processes that lead to inductive logic. So you're trying to look at the process, and you start with a very small sample that's targeted. Who are you trying to find out about? Mine was hospitality top leadership. Then you start data collection and data analysis at the same time. So as you're going through it, you're collecting data, you're writing memos, thoughts that are happening throughout the interview process, and then collecting more data and analyzing it at the same time, starting with coding. It's a 2-step coding process. That way you're not trying to force the data to fit, as opposed to the more structured 3-step coding process in traditional grounded theory. Memo writing is very important because you have to memo write not just during the interview, but as you're analyzing the data and going back and rereading the transcripts and what they said. You need to also think about your interpretation, what you remember from that happening, but also what are your interpretations now that you're rereading it a second time and maybe you missed something without actively listening, because we all have that little second voice in the back of your mind that's kind of going when you're talking to someone. It's when that's quiet and you're just reading the transcript, now what are you understanding and feeling? That's data too. I also scraped from their, I'll talk about that on the next slide, but I also used their websites to back up what they were saying. If I was a little confused about something that I was reading, or I wasn't sure if I understood it right the first time when I was listening or the second time when I was rereading, I went to the website to back it up for clarification. All of this leads to theoretical sampling, and that's how your sample grows. I got to 20. Saturation happened at 16, but Theoretical sampling is essentially looking at where the data is taking you, and each piece of data tells you who to invite to participate next. That leads to your theory generation. As your theory is starting to generate, then you go back and collect more data and go through the process all over again. So I use semi-structured interviews because it was really important to have an open conversation, but also to hit all the points that I needed to hit. So my sample was contacted via email. So I used our alumni database first, and then I'm a member of several national organizations that are hospitality related. So I also contacted them via email. I used LinkedIn, many, and then it spiraled from there, but that's how I got started. Interviews lasted from 40 to 65 minutes. Again, like I said, 20 top management team members, so senior vice president and above. I had 2 CEOs. Most of them were chief level officers though. Constant comparative analysis is taking, as the data is also evolving, you compare it to the literature as well. So you're looking to see what else exists out there. You're actually using prior knowledge in the data analysis process. Interviews were conducted until saturation. It actually happened at 16, but you need to be sure that no new information is going to evolve. So I contacted 4 more people, did some website scraping for any inconsistencies, and ultimately 10 themes were formed for my theory. So what I find? First, this is individual inclusion. So at the, this is the inclusion level. In inclusion, there are 3 different levels. What we primarily focus on in traditional research is the organizational level, which is about the policies, procedures, practices, and like diversity management, and then inclusive culture. Very well researched throughout many different industries, not just hospitality. But I also found that there's 2 other layers to inclusion that we have to consider as well. We have to consider the individual in the leadership team. How do we allow them to be the best person that they can be and include them as a person, as a unique individual? The societal level is about addressing societal biases and the way that socialization informs the way that we think and the way that we interact with other people. So we have to look at the big picture, not just what we're doing in the organization, but how are we addressing how people live outside of our organization as well. So this is what it looks like. So this is where 6 of the themes came into play. We have collaboration. It's also called teamwork. It's essentially at the individual level. Are we encouraging people to interact with people who are just like them, who are different, who have different experiences and things? It's team building. It's having an open door policy. It's being open and welcoming. We also have transformational leadership I found to be a very important part of inclusion, which is having the forethought about the future. Really looking at where can we be tomorrow and acting purposefully like that. At the organizational level are the 2 that are very, very well researched in business in general, diversity management and the culture of inclusion. And then at the societal level, this was really interesting, was because a lot of people felt that if we focused too much on diversity, then it would lead to unintended exclusion, where we're focusing on, again, the other person, not the traditionally included person. And then there's also generational differences. There were some things that I was just like, wow, I can't believe that was just said in the interviews. But it's really about changing attitudes toward who belongs in management and how that's going to evolve over time. One of my participants said, well, once some of the people just die off, it'll be fine. I'm like, wow, that's not where I'm going with this, but I understand what you mean. So in addition, I also found out about equity. So equity is essentially all about fairness and differential treatment to be fair. So an example that I use of this when I'm teaching my classes, because I do talk about this stuff in class as well, is that if you have somebody and you're hiring 2 servers, one server has never been a server before, has never worked in a restaurant before, and another one has worked in restaurants for the last 10 years. Do they need the same training program? Of course not, right? So that's equity, differential treatment with a fair outcome. So the way that we do this is through talent management. So looking at the way that we are handling the people, giving them different training opportunities, different development opportunities. It doesn't have to be equal access. Not everybody wants to be in leadership, and that's okay. We need to understand that and find out how we can tailor our internal policies, procedures, practices, training, development, all of that, and tailor it to individual needs. So having a basic foundation, but then accounting for individual desires. The second one is all about merit. Unfortunately, we assume that decisions are made based on merit. Usually they're not actually, though. We all, as humans, have bias. Even AI has bias, right? So it's just part of it. So what we do is looking at how do we take this and create objectively pay, benefits, salary, development, training, things like that want to happen. So it's all about merit, making sure that we are removing as much as we can the bias out of the processes, but how are we also evaluating people on merit? Just because, it's more like having a scoring rubric, I guess, with different things. Some people have a higher strength in one category than they do in another, but making sure that's weighted based on strengths. The last thing was about diversity. So what do we do? Purposeful recruiting was one of the biggest themes that they said that helped diversity was recruiting with purpose and not even looking at the candidates until you had a diverse pool to begin with. Until you had a diverse pool, you hold off on interviewing and just wait. Accountability was also important, making sure that somebody was held accountable because then actions will actually happen. So that leads to this big old theory. So essentially what they were telling me from these interviews was that we start with inclusion, and that's how we create a better workforce and a work environment that is diverse. Because if you start with a culture of inclusion, that's starting with your organizational values. It's really looking at internally what you can do to make people feel like they belong. And we have to address it at all three levels. Once we have a culture that values inclusion, then we have to treat them with fairness and equity, making sure that we're doing internal audits to ensure that people with more experience should get a higher pay, but it should be a close gap, not a significant one. And then from there, diversity will come, but we have to be purposeful about it. We still have to take actions and we can't just be passive, but we can hire all the diverse people that we want. If we're not including them in the conversation, if we're not treating them fairly, they're going to leave. So all you have is a rotating door instead. So we have to look at the way that our internal structure is first, and then diversity will be able to happen. But it's really a circle. It's a cyclical process. Because now once we have more diversity, then we can do another audit about inclusion. Where are we lacking? What are we doing? Then we can fix those things and do another equity audit, do another different. So it's a continually divine discontent, essentially, where good's never good enough. We need to always keep trying, striving for better. From this, we get a few things. A lot of positive things for our employees. They're going to feel more included. They're going to feel more positively about the organization. And then the organization also performs better. It reduces perceptions of a couple of phenomena, the glass ceiling and the glass cliff. So the glass ceiling, pretty well known at this point, but it's about vertical segregation and people hitting invisible barriers that don't allow them to ascend any further. The glass cliff is, even though you do have diverse people in leadership, a lot of times they're appointed to a precarious position and set up to fail. So these things are reduced if you actually do value inclusion. And then, of course, that's where the higher financial performance comes in. This theory explains a lot of this discrepancies and what people have found in diversity management. Diversity management, we want to say is positive, but there are studies out there that say, no, it creates a more difficult time with communication and with organizational performance, or it's ambiguous. We don't know that diversity actually caused this. What about, the external economy and stuff like that? I'm saying diversity itself isn't going to do it alone. You have to have inclusion and equity too. So with that, let's actually test it. Let's see if I'm right. I started with just inclusion because we have to start somewhere. So that's where I started with a systematic literature review of the first 6 frameworks. But I'm saying that these all load as a second order factor to inclusion. And then this entire thing makes up inclusion. Most people also have previously just used either diversity management or inclusive culture, not even both together. So I'm saying let's look at both of them. So I sent out a survey on Prolific to collect. It has a wide access of people who are willing to, in a timely fashion, complete the study. And I did a time series. It was a time series survey. So I contacted initially 350. And then in September and then in December, I contacted the same 350 people, and I ended up with 310 hospitality leaders from all different types of hospitality. So it's a very wide industry, from casinos to hotels, restaurants, airlines, very wide industry. And we did have representation across. And then I conducted an EFA and a CFA, followed by structural equation modeling to test the hypotheses. So my sample was 45% women, primarily white, between the ages of 30 and 49. They worked in food and beverage, usually as an entry-level manager. They had between 3 and 15 years of experience in the hospitality industry as a whole. And they'd been in their position, it was only leaders, so they had to be at least an entry-level manager to qualify for the study and above. Only 15% had claimed they had faced discrimination at work. Primarily, it was based on race or sex, but we also had disability, gender, age, family status, marital status. So we had a wide range within the discrimination. But I thought it was important to include it as a control variable in here, because if they'd faced discrimination, they might have a different perception of inclusion. So EFA, we dropped 6 items from the analysis. I used principal component analysis with Verimax rotation. That was from the total of 47 items that were generated for the 6 levels of inclusion. Confirmatory factor analysis, we did not have issues with discriminant or convergent validity. They met the criteria. The first order factor, which is just the levels of it, the first level of inclusion, talent management, that was a good fit to the data, but loading them onto individual organizational and societal levels of inclusion was a significantly better fit. So we moved on. This is what it looks like. Individual, organizational, and societal inclusion are all significantly correlated with each other. And of course, the lowest correlation is what you'd expect with individual and societal. So what we did from this theory was I took inclusion and employee outcomes, specifically looking at organizational citizenship and service performance overall. So what I asked them to do at time 2 was to rate their employees on these 3 things. So employee organizational citizenship is going outside of your job description to create a better working environment for everybody. Employee customer performance is how well do they adapt and meet customers' needs and requests. And then employee service recovery performance is when things go wrong, how well do they handle it? And how well do they do in solving customers' problems? So my hypotheses were all positively related. So I anticipated that individual, organizational, and societal inclusion, if we address all of these things, it will increase employee behaviors. So what I found, it was a good model fit to the entire data from the SEM, was that employee organizational citizenship behaviors were significantly increased by individual and societal inclusion. Employee customer performance was significantly increased by all 3. And then employee service recovery performance was significantly increased by individual, organizational, and organizational, but not societal inclusion. So ultimately, that's what the entire model looks like. So what are we here for? We're here for recommendations, right? What do we do? What do we do with this information? First, my recommendation is to, and if you want the scale to do this, I can give it to you. It is in there. It's on the QR codes. But first, conduct an inclusion audit using the leadership inclusion framework. That's going to tell you where to start. Wherever you're lowest, performances are, that's where, that's the biggest issue, and that's where you try to start solving the problems. And then it's really important when you're going about this and trying organizational change to let your employees know that it's going to be hard. But we're in this together. And while organizational change is difficult, it's worth it in the end because we'll have better outcomes for everyone. So if transformational leadership is where your primary focus is, first, offer some executive coaching. We need to really focus on how we can model our leaders to be more inclusion focused, but also long-term focused and seeing towards the future, not just the day-to-day. We have many leadership development programs that are focused on transformational leadership that exist out there, but the primary one that's recognized are the 4 I's. So it's idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. These are the 4 I's of transformational leadership, and many programs out there exist. If you need to enhance more teamwork or collaboration among your staff and your leaders specifically, I would recommend first is doing KPIs or key performance indicators that are really rating in their, let's just call it RPT because that's what we're familiar with here. In RPT that say joint performance is what's going to be rewarded. We need to see you working with other people and it being purposeful and not just the same teams. Breaking it up. Silos are a big problem in most organizations. So if we're encouraging cross-departmental, cross colleges, if you will, and then that's also part of the RPT packet, just going with acronyms that we all know here, then that allows us to understand different styles, ways that things are done. To advance diversity management, if that's where we're lacking, it would be to conduct an internal audit of what are your policies and procedures. Are they actually moving toward including people, getting people to feel more confident, getting people to understand what their hiring, their promotion expectations are? Are we just looking at one career path? Are we not, open to multiple different interpretations of success for our employees? And then invest in diverse talent pipelines. We need to develop partnerships with other organizations around us so that way we can broaden. Where are you recruiting? Are you posting in the same 5 job boards? Well, you're only reaching the same 5 type of people. We need to broaden that up. Look at our target market, expand it some. And then build a more inclusive culture if this is where we need to go. Remember, I'm not shy. I will raise my hand and ask a question. Not everybody is like that. Or provide feedback. So we need to understand that all voices need to be heard and we need to be purposeful in collecting those voices, not just listening to the loudest ones. I would do this through a QR code. It would be very easy on a presentation that we're having. They can sign it, send in their information. It's anonymous and you're still getting valuable feedback. And people are probably going to be a little bit more honest if they have a way to anonymously say something and know that their job won't be affected. Formalizing mentorship programs is also very important because mentorship is known to significantly increase leadership capabilities and develop a pipeline. And that's why primarily the same people who look alike are in succession planning within organizations. So we need to understand of matching people of various backgrounds through mentorship to create these, to break the silos. And then for societal inclusion, addressing generational differences. So we need to, one of my master's students who is graduating in May, she just successfully defended her thesis, very proud of her, developed a cross-generational communication program. And it would be super easy to implement it. It's only 8 meetings. So you could do it 1 hour for 8 days, or you could do it 1 8-hour day. And it helps, it significantly increases cross-generational communication. So you're more understanding of each other. We can also design employee resource groups that are open to allies. So employee resource groups are typically just for the person who identifies in that way. But if we open it to allies too, then we're opening, and I get it, safe space, but maybe we need 2 versions, one allies and then one just for that group. But if you can open up those silos again and create more communication and then it leads to more understanding. and it breaks down biases and stereotypes. Addressing unintended exclusion. So we need to make sure that we are recognizing everybody and really conducting an audit. Who are getting the awards and recognitions? Who are getting the invitations to come and sit with the senior leadership team? And then we need to also train on cultural humility. Just because success for you means one thing, it doesn't mean that it looks like that for everybody else. So we need to understand how we're different, why we're different, and that we're different. We also, one of the things that, and I didn't read the quotes to you all because I didn't feel like that was a good use of time, but one of them said, and it was very impactful for me, was that they said, oh, so-and-so is just coming back from maternity leave. She would be an excellent fit for this promotion, but I don't think she'll want it because she's a new mom. They didn't even ask her, do you want to do this? And that is just one of those, you think it's a harmless interpretation of what somebody might want, and you think that you're doing them a favor, but you're making a decision for someone else without even including them in the conversation at all. So it's recognizing when things like that are happening. And then also the person who understood that that was happening, she said that she wished she had stopped the person who was speaking and spoke up right then, but she didn't. So it's having that confidence to also, when you recognize something, say, whoa, 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 hold on, let's realize what just happened here. Celebrating everybody and then ensuring authenticity is valued for everyone as well. Authenticity is a really big part of inclusion, because if you can't bring your whole self to work, how are you going to be fully included at work? So making sure that we value authenticity. So what's next? I'm actually going to test the whole framework next. I'm actually working on data collection right now. I just finished data collection for inclusion. I'm launching equity next month. So once that's finished, but I had to contact a huge sample for this because I'm sure with 4 different time points for this, a lot of people are going to drop out. So I had to contact a much larger sample. So data collection is going to take quite some time, probably not till the end. Don't expect to see this till the end of the year, Dean. So it'll take some time. Looking at outcomes for leaders too is also important, although it's going to be harder to collect that without going into and doing a case study of different dyads, because self-report, is it really, there's challenges with it. Anyway, so looking at the outcomes for the leaders themselves, looking at outcomes for the institution too. Does performance actually increase as we think that it will? And then perceptions of the glass ceiling and the glass cliff is something that I'd really like to work more on because right now with the political turmoil, I'm not sure if this is going to work so well, but I'm still going to try. But those perceptions are really important for us to continue to keep at the front of the mind for everybody. So with that, thank you for your time.
My job to facilitate you.
Okay.
And my job first to say thank you.
Thank you.
So 3 things. Number 1, your talk reminded me of why I always say, like whenever I have an opportunity to really engage with students, it reminds me of why I got into this line of work.
Yeah.
And it just occurred to me in listening to you that I often overlook the second reason, which is stuff like this, not stuff like this. It's the research aspect. It's the scholarship, especially scholarship that I'm not directly familiar with, but that connects to some other things that I've done or that interest me. It brings fully together what higher ed ought to be. So thank you for that, because I found it really enriching and stimulating and interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
It also made me feel simultaneously smarter for listening to you and dumber for all the stuff that I didn't know or no longer do. So thank you for reminding me of my slipping in statistics and everything else. So thanks. But as I said, as part of the introduction, I also, while your focus was on hospitality, it's obvious that there's really broad applicability with your research and with your inclusion theory. I can just see that being applicable. I was sitting there thinking my sister is the COO of a tech firm in Baltimore, and I was like, oh my God, I just want to send her this talk, because she's also, because she has the complexion for the connection, the chief diversity officer for that firm.
Sure.
And so anyway, but she's always looking for things that can help her kind of contextualize how to lead in these spaces. So anyway, thank you for all of that.
Sure.
I also appreciate your poise under pressure when the clip didn't play. I thought that was that you managed that beautifully. And so I'm going to open with a question, and then I'll defer to other folks because I have a microphone, so I can do that. I'm going to pick. Well, actually, one thing. This is kind of a question, but you mentioned the glass cliff, and I'm giving a talk actually. I think Monday on what's called dual accountability. So essentially, when you have underrepresented people in leadership who feel kind of a bit of role conflict between their job and the duties associated with that job, but also the need to be connected to and represent a broader community. And so I thought that there were some really interesting connections between the glass cliff conversation and dual accountability, because oftentimes, so my question, let's get to a question on the glass cliff, it scribbles, so forgive me. But you mentioned the glass cliff in terms of good leaders being put in kind of precarious positions, like where essentially they might be set up to not be as successful as they otherwise could be. So in doing your research and in doing the interviews, have you come across any good models, not just individual strategies, but kind of more intentional models that help support people who are in those potentially glass cliff-like positions?
That is an excellent question, and thank you for it, because this research actually started as it was going to be to develop a model for the glass cliff, and it just spiraled. So my PhD comprehensive exam was on the glass cliff. So great question for me. No, they do not really exist out there, and that's why I was going to do it. So I wish that there were, and I wish I had a better, here's the solution to all your problems right here. But it's not really out there, because what happens is when people of a certain background are promoted in a glass cliff position, they're essentially expected to have this hero effect. And it's like, okay, well, we're having all these problems in our company. So here, you're different from the person who's in here, fix it. And it never works, or very rarely. In some cases it does. Actually, one of the people I interviewed for this, she was put in a very similar situation. She is a Black woman, and she was promoted from F&B manager to the VP of F&B. She skipped like 3 levels because they just needed somebody to fix it, and she did. So now she's in the way upper echelons. I think that she is now the, if I'm remembering correctly, she actually runs development for the company. But so she transferred out of food and beverage, of course, but eventually. But unless you have that just right thing at the right time, at the, with the right person who you can bounce ideas off of, it usually doesn't happen that way. And so they're set up to fail. So most things on the glass cliff are actually qualitative research and identifying problems, and not really doing too much to propose solutions. And I wish that we as researchers were more solution focused than problem focused. I understand that we have to identify the problems in order to fix them, but it's not doing me much good if we just identify the problem. So.
Excellent. Thank you. And another thing I appreciate about your theory and your work was it did seem very solutions focused. So thank you for that. And I see Dean Lubas's hand.
Yeah, so I have a question about one of your findings. It struck me as only 15% of your group identifying as having been victims of discrimination.
Yeah.
That number seemed low.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, and maybe you don't have the follow-up data to know, but I'd be interested in hearing your speculation or other research you're aware of. Is there an issue with not necessarily recognizing when you've been discriminated against? Because I know in my career, there's stuff that happened to me early in my career that I didn't recognize it for what it was until I got older and smarter.
Yes. And I was in a similar situation. I started research on the glass ceiling. That was my very first study. Little baby researcher, Michelle. It was on the glass ceiling because I didn't think it existed anymore. Boy, was I wrong. But I was like, oh, I'm an assistant general manager. There's no glass ceiling. Women can do whatever they want if they just put their mind to it. And that's not the case. I didn't realize it until, again, I started the research. I was older, smarter, everything. There actually is a study out there that they claim that because their sample didn't know what the glass ceiling was, that there wasn't any longer a glass ceiling. So a different researcher took that study and said, just because they don't know what it's called doesn't mean they're not experiencing it. So I think my question was just a control for it if they had recognized overt discrimination, but there's also microaggressions. There's also like really it's harder to recognize, and some people just don't want to admit that they've been discriminated against, I think, too. So I was also surprised with how low it was of the sample, but so yes, I think it was just that they didn't necessarily explicitly recognize it, more so than they hadn't experienced it at all. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
So that,
Okay. So, thank you, Michelle. I want to go back to the research. Your work here was C-level executives primarily.
Primarily.
What are the implications for our students and how we teach them? Because some of them will get there, but there's a big difference between where you start and where you end. So what would be the implications for our pedagogical work and getting our students ready, especially given the profile of our students? And you work with them every day.
I do. And that's a great question because I teach this in my classes. We usually do some sort of session on how to develop their leadership skills throughout, because I teach very applicable leadership courses. They're management courses. So how can I teach management of solely operations without teaching them about leadership styles and other things like that? So we talk about this in class, and it's all about recognition first. Second is I teach them to interview the company when they go to an interview. I'm like, you're not simply there to answer their questions and just land any job. I'm like, you need to be purposeful in which jobs that you select, because you don't want to end up for a company that you're just going to leave in 3 to 6 months, because then it's also not going to look good that you didn't last for very long, at an organization when you're applying for the next one. It's better to find a good fit. And person organization fit is one of the things that I think is most important for us to teach our students. But systemic change takes a long time. Unfortunately, that's just the way that it is. We can't expect change to happen overnight. We have to take it one step at a time. But I tell my students, be part of the change. I'm like, be who you want to be as a leader in what organization that you think is going to be a good fit for you. So it's more about critically analyzing companies more so than, and teaching how to be a good leader who enacts these things. I think that's where we start. If we're teaching the future, it's how I see it. So if I can instill in them these great traits and that's what they're going in with, I hope that they keep it throughout their careers. There's no guarantee. You learn from your organization on how to act. That's the culture. That's just what we do. But I hope that they can choose one where they'll be able to grow and thrive in this type of situation.
I just have a question. So I'm Ray. I work in advancement, which is a lot like hospitality, actually, in lots of ways. Sales-minded, donor relations experiences. You described hospitality much like advancement. The majority of the working field, women, people of color, majority of VPs, not that. And so I think about the culture of ours, it actually is though, which is a culture of organizations is think about my development of a group like this. What's the first thing you would tell me to do if I had a magic wand to make my culture more inclusive? Like what's the first thing I should do?
I'm going to tell you, it depends. It depends on what your culture is currently and where you want to be in the future. If it's more, definitely look at your recruiting strategies. But looking at how you're currently treating your employees, run an audit on pay, benefits, and opportunities and things like that. That's something that you can do internally and pretty easily with as long as you have that data. I'm assuming that you have access to it. and seeing, are you treating employees fairly? And do they feel comfortable enough to come to you or any leader? You know, people don't like each other. That's just life. Okay. But do they have someone they can go to? Right? If it's, you know, not you, if it's somebody else. So we need to look at what's really going on within the organization as far as how we're treating people and ensuring that they can bring their full selves to work, that they feel comfortable. Really, what I would say is just it takes like 5 minutes, 10 minutes at most for them to fill out the survey, the leadership inclusion framework. And that'll really tell you where to start. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I'd be happy to share.
Hold on, Dr. Dabbs. I'm just going to clear this really quickly. Just going through the Q&A here. Thanks for the nice presentation. Keep up the excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vantula. Thank you for mentioning benign sexism. Its negative implications for women tend to be underestimated. Thank you, Leslie. And then Candy Lou has a question. How can one properly detect that they are potentially going to be considered for a glass cliff position? Sometimes people may feel cornered to accept. Are they able to reject the position but not be penalized or labeled?
Candy, that's an excellent question. So I would say it depends on the organization. If you're facing a glass cliff, though, you'll know because the organization won't be performing very well and they'll be looking for change. So that's going to be the easiest way to identify is if they want you to be a hero and fix the organization. Can you reject the position without being penalized? Probably not. If you're facing a glass cliff, they're not inclusive and they're probably going to, of course, this is assuming I don't know the organization, right? I don't know the leaders there, but if you're facing a glass cliff, then they're not going to take too kindly to being told no. And so the culture there needs work and they're not inclusive. So therefore they're not going to be equitable in offering a position and then turning it down. And then if you don't want to move up there, great. It'll probably be okay, but don't expect to move up when things are better. I would be looking for an exit strategy personally.
You have the last question.
Oh, great. It's not really a question, I guess, more of a comment, but it made me think about Ray when we were talking to a donor and they brought up they work in the in a credit union, and they brought up the idea of students needing these leadership skills. And because in the sciences, our students don't take classes. Now I want my students to take your classes, which a different problem, but I think, I mean, I wish I had those classes to help prepare me earlier on. And so I think like it just makes me think, like, should we start to think about how we can embed the curriculum a little bit more, because every industry has leaders. And so thinking about how that could map better with, cross collaboration with different colleges, but specifically in the sciences, we're so focused on the science and not that leadership piece that gets missed, and sometimes it shows and in other places. And so I think that it could be a really cool collaboration if we think about that in the future.
I would love to have that conversation because I think leadership would be a really important thing for GE. We're training leaders here, right? That's what college is in the end of it. I mean, you might start in an entry-level position no matter where you go, science or psychology or hospitality management, but eventually you want to get into leadership because that's why we're getting a college degree, right? We want to be in the higher upper echelons rather than just starting out entry. So I think, yes, let's talk.
All right. Well, we are up against the clock. I had other questions myself, but apparently you were too interesting, so I couldn't monopolize the conversation. But thank you so much, Dr. Russen. This was complete.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to the library, Robbie, Dean Lubas, and everybody else who helped put this on and this entire series on. So thanks.
Thank you.